So welcome everybody to this evening's webinar. We'll touch a little bit on the digestive system because I think it's always really important to start there. But I wanted to talk about vitamins and minerals. I get questions all the time. Well, my horse is just eating hay and he looks great. So what's he missing? Is he missing anything? And so if we understand a little bit about what each of the minerals does for the horse, then we can say, well, maybe he's missing a little copper or zinc, and these would be the symptoms in your horse. Now, chances are these horses aren't going to be so severely deficient in any mineral that they're going to show really terrible signs like death. But it could be poor recovery, not great hair coat, lack of immune function. So it's important that horses have a balanced diet, no matter how much exercise they are or are not doing. So if we begin here, the digestive system, everybody on the call I know has heard this over and over again. We have the stomach, it's small. This is not where we have a lot of vitamin and mineral absorption, but this is where we have breakdown. We've got acid breaking down the food so that it can be broken up into its proteins, fats or lipids, your sugars, glucose in particular, breaking that down so that then in the small intestine and the hindgut they can be absorbed, breaking down those minerals, so breaking them out of that food particle. So the acid in the stomach, whilst we talk about it as a negative thing all the time, the acid in the stomach is actually really important. Now, we don't want too much of it and we don't want it too strong, but we also don't want to turn it off completely for long periods of time, which is what your drugs like Gastrogard or Ulcegard, they turn off the acid completely. And for short periods of time, that's okay. But for long periods of time, that's not okay. We decrease the digestion of the food, so we have less digested food passing through to the small intestine and therefore into the hindgut. So having the stomach acid at or around a 4 in the stomach is actually really productive. From there, we move to the small intestine. Enzymes, not acid, that will continue that digestion. And the enzymes will continue to break down those food particles and then start some absorption. Carbohydrates, including a little bit of fiber, starts to get broken down here, primarily in the hindgut though. Proteins, fats, as we mentioned, still continue that breakdown. In the stomach, we start the breakdown, and in the hindgut, we continue. In the small intestine, we continue that breakdown. And then finally, in the hindgut, we've got microbial fermentation. So in the small intestine, when we're breaking down those nutrients, really we're doing that in the grains that we're feeding or the concentrate feeds. And then we get to the fibrous portion, say the hay or the plant material. That's going to be broken down by microbes in the hindgut, in the cecum, large colon, and small colon, broken down into volatile fatty acids, which we further broken down to create energy. One of the most common B vitamins that is a byproduct of breaking down fiber, those microbes breaking down fiber, is biotin. So the microbes in the horse's gut actually make biotin, they make B vitamins. And we also have water and electrolyte absorption. When we talk about electrolytes, we're talking about sodium chloride, which is plain salt, calcium, magnesium, these are all potassium, these are all electrolytes. So a mineral, naturally occurring substance that is solid and inorganic, right? It's literally a rock. They come from the Earth's crust. Minor part of the diet by weight, but a critical role in health and performance. Numerous functions. There's not one mineral in the body that just has one role. They have numerous roles. We'll get to a little cheat sheet on the units, but typically our macro minerals, calcium, phosphorus, that kind of thing, that we need in slightly higher quantities, they're going to be measured in either grams per kilogram or percentage. Micro minerals, things that we need in much smaller quantities, we're going to see milligrams per kilogram, which is the same as ppms or parts per million. Now, I want to go back to the very first bullet point. A mineral is a naturally occurring substance that is solid and inorganic. And we all know that horses are not meant to eat dirt. They're not meant to eat rocks. And so what we've done is we have tried to provide the horses with minerals that mimic the way they would see them in nature. So in nature, the horse eats plants. The plants have roots that go down into the ground that absorb these inorganic minerals into the plant material. And when the horse eats the plant material, those minerals, those rock type minerals, are attached to organic parts of that plant. So proteins or carbohydrates in that plant, and that's how those minerals are absorbed. So when we use the term chelation or chelated or organic minerals, chelation in Latin means claw, to grab onto, and we use amino acids, proteins. These are organic substances, things that you would see in a plant, to attach to those rock type minerals so that they're more bioavailable to the horse, so that that horse is absorbing them the way that they are intended to. That is the big difference between DAC minerals and a lot of other minerals out there, is the fact that we use chelated minerals, and so they're much more bioavailable. So what that means, the bottom line is, more get absorbed into the horse and less go into the manure pile. So a little bit of a trick with units, because I know it can be very, very difficult to kind of look at and compare and understand how much we've got. But what I will also point out, in the DAC catalog and on every label, one of the things that NASC, the National Animal Supplement Council, requires us to do in our labeling, and anyone that is a partner in NASC, they require you to use in a guaranteed analysis to either use the percentage or the ppm, or if it's vitamins, you'll use IUs per pound. But also, after that, in parentheses, how much per serving size or per ounce. And so you can go through the catalog or the labels and see that next to the guaranteed analysis. So, for example, the Total Performance Plus, the crude protein is 8%. In 1 ounce, that equals 2,270 milligrams of crude protein. Well, we can see that, but sometimes other labels don't have that, or other companies don't do that. And then we're trying to compare across labels, and some are in percent, some are in milligrams per kilogram, and it's really difficult. So one thing, the very first thing that you need to remember is, if you see ppm or parts per million, it is the exact same thing as milligrams per kilogram. All right? So 16 ppms is 16 milligrams per kilogram. There are 2.2 pounds in every kilogram. So if we take that milligrams per kilogram and divide that by 2.2, we get milligrams per pound. There are 16 ounces in a pound. So if you take that milligrams per pound and you divide it by 16, then you get milligrams per ounce. And most of the products are per ounce. And let's say we're feeding 3 ounces. We take that number, which was milligrams per ounce, and we times it by 3. Percentages, really the easiest way to do is type it into Google. You can see what I've done there, 2% of 2 ounces in milligrams, and it will give you a number. I will post this slide on the DAC Dealers Facebook page. If you're not a part of that Facebook page, you can reach out to your territory manager or to me directly if you have my contact, and I can provide this to you, because it really is a good little cheat sheet that you should paste on the inside cover of your catalog. So let's go to calcium. 99% of calcium is found in the teeth and the bones. Equine bone is about 35% calcium. But it's also in your cells, muscle contraction, nerve impulses, cell membrane. So the layer around your cell that makes it stay a cell and not fall apart. Blood clotting, enzyme regulation. These are all utilize calcium. Typically, the calcium that has been used is calcium carbonate, otherwise known as limestone. It's an inorganic form, and not all inorganic minerals are super bio unavailable, right? Some of them are just fine, but we still utilize some calcium carbonate in our products, but in the products where calcium is absolutely critical. So we think about calcium in the pre-buff and the colt grower and the cool gut. In the colt grower for bone strength, in the cool gut and the pre-buff for gut buffering. We use marine-derived calcium. And so instead of calcium carbonate, we use a product called calcite, which comes from fossilized red algae or coral. And if you look at it under a microscope, it has a lot of surface areas. It looks like honeycomb. So there's lots of different surface areas for that acid to touch and for the enzymes to absorb when it comes to bone strength. So calcite is much more bioavailable than calcium carbonate, and it's got serious buffering potential and increases bone strength. If we're just thinking about where our natural feedstuffs, where calcium comes into the diet, but our cereal grains are relatively low in calcium. Barley, corn, oats, rice bran, all very low in calcium. Soybean meal, 0.4%, still pretty low to be honest. And then beet pulp is actually pretty high in calcium. Now, if we have excess phosphorus in the diet, that will block the uptake of calcium. So we have to be careful that we don't utilize, so wheat bran, for example, has a lot of phosphorus in it. We wouldn't want more calcium in the diet than more phosphorus in the diet than calcium, because it would unbalance that ratio and cause severe bone abnormalities. There are other things that come in plants, phytates and oxalates, that are in certain plant species, grass species, Johnson's grass, for example, that if a horse grazes, they're high in oxalates, and that oxalate will block the uptake of calcium. In Australia, it's very common, and the disease that horses get, we call it big head, because they're not able to absorb calcium out of their diet. But horses are pretty smart. They know they need calcium, so they start sucking it out of their own bones to make it look like they've got plenty in the blood. So another little side note is it's actually very hard to test for mineral deficiency or excess, or whether they've got enough in the bloodstream because of something like that. You would take a blood sample from a horse and say, oh, the calcium's fine, because they're sucking it out of their own bones to make sure there's enough in the bloodstream. Hair samples also are not accurate because it's not an accurate right now representation of what's going on. It was right 6 months ago, not now. The only way to get a true analysis is to do a muscle biopsy or a liver biopsy, and I don't recommend that anybody do that. Work with a nutritionist, balance your diet. Other places, alfalfa. We all know that alfalfa is very high in calcium. It's absorbed in the small intestine. You can't measure it in blood. It also regulates vitamin D. So we know that sunlight Vitamin D and calcium kind of go together. High calcium, while we know that high phosphorus can block the uptake of calcium, we also know that severely high calcium can also block the uptake of phosphorus. So our ideal calcium to phosphorus ratio is 2 to 1. In adult horses, you can get up to 5 to 1. In young horses, you want to keep it closer together. This is that disease I called big head. You can see in those nasal bones there, they get all spongy and they actually start to pull calcium out of the bones in these nasal passages, and they get spongy and really big like that. Phosphorus. 14 to 70%, 17% of the skeleton is phosphorus. It's crazy to think, but it's important for energy metabolism, for certain enzymes. Oxalates in those grasses can also block phosphorus. Deficiencies in phosphorus can cause weak bones. Excess causes a calcium deficiency because we're blocking the uptake of calcium. And again, I will share these slides with you so that you can have a look, but you can look here at the calcium to phosphorus ratio in certain feedstuffs. So oats, low in calcium, high in phosphorus. Same with corn, barley, wheat bran, soybean meal, rice bran, all inverted calcium to phosphorus ratio, which is not good. If we look at alfalfa, that is the correct ratio, right? We're looking at more calcium than phosphorus. All of our forages are better. At least orchard grass is about 1 to 1, and you can get away with 1 to 1 with an adult horse, but again, with our young growing horses, we really want to stick more 2 to 1, 3 to 1. Copper. So copper is actually really important for connective tissue, moving iron around the blood, energy production. And so iron is really important in the blood because that carries oxygen. That improves your oxygen carrying capacity. Copper is also important for melanin, which is what gives you the dark skin tone and dark hair tone. So with your dark coated horses, a deficiency in copper could definitely result in a dull coat. Hence, Bloom has adequate, very bioavailable sources of copper. Deficiencies in copper, you can see growth issues, artery rupture, chronic anemia, loss of hair pigment. Excessive amounts of copper can cause liver issues. Again, unless your horses were chewing on copper pipes or there was copper in the soil and they were licking it, it's pretty rare to see significant deficiencies or excesses in most of our horses. But minor deficiencies even can start to affect these pathways. Copper interacts with a whole slew of other minerals. So we don't want too much and we don't want too little. If you have too much zinc, it's going to block copper, just like calcium and phosphorus go together, zinc and copper go together, and they need to be in the right ratios. Blood copper values, not useful, just like calcium copper values, not useful at all. I've got them ranked here. So molasses is pretty high in copper, flax, beet pulp, wheat midds, and then as we go down, most of your grass hays, most of your even legume hays across the world, even the best quality, are going to be deficient in zinc and copper. Oats and corn also very low in minerals. We just don't look at grains as a source of any nutrient other than energy and sometimes protein. Zinc. Zinc plays a role in more than 100 different enzymes. So I mentioned there are enzymes in the small intestine that are breaking down food. These minerals are also part of those enzymatic relationships. Highest concentrations are actually in the eye, intermediate skin, connective tissue, liver, bone, muscle. Low concentrations of zinc in the blood, milk, lungs, and brain. Again, blood not a great indicator for zinc. The absorption of your inorganic zinc is only about 5 to 15%. And we always show this is kind of this spider web here on the right-hand side, is all of the lines. So calcium, if we go to calcium right there next to the horse's head, and calcium, if we follow all the lines, it connects with phosphorus, it connects with sulfur, it connects with iron, or that's fluoride actually. It connects with zinc, it connects with magnesium. So it interacts with all of those. Any of those in not enough quantities or too high quantities will also affect calcium. So it's really important that all of the minerals are not too high, not too low. Deficiencies in zinc, and we have some glucose and insulin metabolism issues. Poor coat and hoof, hair loss, reduced immune function. Zinc is fuels, it actually feeds those intestinal cells and repairs intestinal cells. So when you take any of your immune boosting, vitamin C, airborne, that kind of thing, it's got really high doses of zinc. And that's really what's helping your immune system, not the chronically high doses of zinc. Deficiencies also, developmental orthopedic disease in foals. Excess zinc, lameness, stiff gait, blocks the uptake of copper. Blood values, again, not a good indicator. If we look at the feedstuffs that are high in zinc, wheat midds, rice bran, oats, these are kind of from high to moderate. From grasses on down, really not very high. Selenium. Pretty much what we have found, the whole country is deficient in selenium when it comes to horses. It's a powerful antioxidant. It interacts with your thyroid hormones as well, T3 and T4, muscle health, immune function. Selenium in forages and grains, pretty low. But it comes in, when it's in a forage, it's in that organic form, and that's what we want to mimic. When mares are fed the organic form of selenium, milk values are much higher. Selenium in the soil is inorganic, so sodium selenite or selenate, and that's pretty inefficiently absorbed by horses. So in deficiency and excess, some of the symptoms are the same. So one thing that I don't have written on the slide here, but excess and deficiencies in selenium, their white markings will become very hypersensitive to the sun or light, and they'll burn really easily. But dull coat, muscle soreness, reduced immune function, reduced fertility, muscle disorders, eye disorders. These are all symptoms of this, where you can see in this top picture, the hoof is actually coming off. What I have seen is I'll first see bleeding right around the carnet band, and the whole hoof capsule will slough off. When you get too much selenium, again, photosensitive white spots, cracking or complete sloughing of the feet. Some plants in droughts will accumulate selenium and other things like nitrates. Again, blood is not a great indicator of selenium. Muscle is, so a muscle biopsy, but nobody's going to do that. Manganese. We don't think about manganese that often, but it's really important in bone formation. We've all heard of chondroitin sulfate, right? It's part of a lot of our joint supplements. Manganese is part of chondroitin sulfate. It's part of cartilage formation. It's important for reproduction, fetal development, so growing that fetus in utero, immune function, skin and hoof. Bone formation I'll go back to, so CMZ paste, copper, manganese, and zinc, all important for cartilage, bone development, especially in those young animals. Enzymes as well as carbohydrate and fat metabolism. Deficiencies in manganese, actually pretty rare because we usually get plenty of manganese out of our forages. But if they were deficient, not getting enough forage, bone abnormalities, poor growth, bowing of the legs, it's not very toxic, so you can have quite a bit in the diet. But if it gets really high, it will block the uptake of phosphorus. Iodine, another one, mostly found in the thyroid, makes your thyroid hormones T3 and T4. Now, your thyroid hormones affect everything in your body, reproductive system, cardiovascular system, but your muscles, your nervous system, respiratory system. Having balanced thyroid hormone is really important. That being said, there are certain raw ingredients that people will supplement that have very, very high amounts of iodine or variable amounts of iodine. Those things like kelp meal. I don't like to feed kelp or seaweed because it can have very varying levels of iodine, can have way too much or way too little. And somebody asked me the other day, well, don't we use seaweed for our calcium source, the calcite? No, that is fossilized coral. So hard coral, not wet seaweed. So deficiencies, you don't produce your thyroid hormones, so no reproduction, decreased immune function, low body temperature, stillborn or weak foals, really lethargic, hair loss, poor coat, goiter is this kind of swelling here in the throat. And the same symptoms as deficiency are excess, but more dangerous. You can have death. Supplementation with seaweed is not a good idea. Magnesium. 60% of magnesium is in the skeleton. Again, really important. 30% in the muscle. Enzyme regulation, muscle contraction. Helps to regulate calcium. Absorbed in the small and large intestine. Now, we know that a deficiency can cause nervousness, muscle tremors, or even incoordination. So from that, people extrapolated, well, my horse is nervous, maybe he's deficient in magnesium, and we give him boatloads of magnesium and see if we can calm him down. It's actually pretty rare for horses to be deficient in magnesium. They get plenty in the diet, but we do know that adding additional magnesium can help moderate behavior, calm a horse slightly. Excessive amounts of magnesium will actually compromise those intestinal cells, cause like a laxative effect, block the uptake of calcium, block the uptake of phosphorus, so decrease bone strength. Potassium, an electrolyte, 75% in muscle, 5% in skeleton, 5% in blood and skin, in the gut. The first potassium is depleted out of your muscle. Forages are higher, much higher than cereal grains. Low potassium in foals leads to decreased feed intake. Potassium requirement is really directly linked to the amount they sweat, which is directly linked to exercise level. So the harder your horse is working, or the hotter it is, the more potassium they require. There's not just a set requirement for potassium, it's an electrolyte, so the requirements go up and down really based on their sweating. Heavy sweating can deplete. Diarrhea, can deplete muscle cramps, weakness, fatigue. Excessive potassium can cause heart failure. So that is what happens in a horse with HYPP, hyperkalemic periodic paralysis. So they cannot utilize potassium very well. And it's like the cell. So potassium, if you think about it in a very lay terms, there's potassium, calcium, sodium in your bloods, in your cells, and they create electrical impulses, and it's kind of like opening a gate and closing a gate, opening a gate and closing a gate, opening it, letting the electrical impulse out, closing it, stopping that electrical impulse. And what happens in a horse with HYPP is somebody's just left the gate a little bit open. So we just constantly have those electrical impulses leaking out, the twitching, and worst case scenario, actually, it can cause heart failure. The total diet, so that's the concentrate and the hay included, of a horse with HYPP should be less than 1.2% potassium. High potassium feeds, sugar, your beet pulp, kelp, alfalfa, soy meal, some grasses, and then things like most of our local grass hays are actually pretty low in potassium. Fats, no potassium. Grains, pretty low in potassium. Now if we go to vitamins, vitamin A and vitamin E are what we call fat-soluble vitamins. So this means that they absorb through the fat-soluble vitamin receptors, and they are stored in your fat. And when your body needs that vitamin A, they will pull it out of the fat. If you've got a really skinny horse, it decreases their ability to absorb and store fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin A is really important for night vision, reproduction, embryo development, and immune function. So the Breeders' Excel, the Breeders' Choice Plus, much higher vitamin A content than your other vitamin and mineral supplements. High amounts of vitamin A in fresh green pasture, low amounts in cereal grains. So deficiency in vitamin A, impaired growth in foals, impaired reproductive ability. If you have too much vitamin E, so I don't like to feed any more than 10,000 IUs of vitamin E a day, because if you do, it can block the uptake of vitamin A. Pretty much as soon as you cut hay, within about 2 weeks, your vitamin E and your vitamin A are really low. Excess amounts, overgrowth of the fetus, fragile bones. Vitamin E, another fat-soluble vitamin, really important as an antioxidant. So if you've ever watched anything rot, that's oxidative stress. That is breakdown, that is cell death. And that's happening daily in our animals and ourselves. And so what we want to do is slow that down or turn it off, and we use antioxidants, things like selenium, vitamin E. But vitamin E is also important for muscle function, muscle development, immune function. High amounts in immature pasture, again, as soon as you cut that grass, the vitamin E is pretty much gone. A lot of horses that have poor top line, poor muscling, I recommend trying vitamin E, especially if we've evaluated their diet and we know they're getting plenty of protein, then we're going to look at vitamin E. Oops. Deficiency, immune function, muscle weakness, tying up. In worst case scenarios, there are these genetic diseases that we know that by deficiency in vitamin E can be worse, muscle wasting, excesses in vitamin E block the uptake of vitamin A. So we want to balance the diets, and I've got a few diets here. So I've got a local Timothy hay, 20 pounds of grass hay fed to a 1,000-pound mature horse doing nothing, maintenance. And you can see that this horse will probably look nice and fat and shiny. He's getting enough digestible energy, DE. He's getting enough crude protein, getting enough calcium and phosphorus from this hay. but he's not getting enough copper, zinc, selenium, manganese, and iodine. So maybe it was a broodmare and looks fat and shiny, but we know selenium is really important for reproductive function. Maybe the hair coat isn't quite as dark as it could be, deficient in copper. Maybe the hoof quality just isn't as great as it could be, deficient in zinc. Oh. So if we take 2 ounces of DAC orange with that 20 pounds of our local grass hay, and you can see we didn't need any extra calories or protein, which we're not going to get out of the DAC orange, but we were able to balance all of the other minerals that we were lacking. We take a 10-year-old horse at 1,000 pounds doing light exercise, and again, the hay wasn't quite enough at 20 pounds a day to give him the energy that he needed to maintain his body weight. So we throw in 2 pounds of oats and our 2 ounces of DAC orange, and you can see that this diet is still balanced. The hay is represented by the darker green in the bars, and you can see the hay alone for this horse didn't meet the energy requirements, didn't meet the mineral requirements, gave enough crude protein. So it's actually pretty rare for horses to be deficient in protein if they're eating enough forage. What about if we have a horse that's doing moderate exercise, maybe a bit more showing? Mixed hay, alfalfa grass mix, 5 pounds of oats. He's going to look shiny and fat. He's got plenty of energy and protein in the diet, but still phosphorus, copper, zinc, selenium, manganese, iodine, vitamin E, all deficient in this horse's diet. One of the supplements that a lot of people lean towards is Platinum Performance. 2 ounces of Platinum Performance, which tries to do everything but does nothing very well. And you can see the diet is still not balanced. 2 ounces of DAC Total Performance and the diet is balanced. If we do look at intense exercise, you got 15 pounds of alfalfa hay now and 7 pounds of oats, 4 ounces of Platinum Performance, and still not enough mineral to actually balance this horse's nutrient requirements. 4 ounces of Total Performance Plus, which is designed primarily as a vitamin and mineral supplement. The plus, it has in 3 ounces, it has the therapeutic dose of the joint supplement. And you can see the diet is fully balanced. Growing horse, alfalfa and oats. Not all the minerals are not balanced. Grow Strong Minerals is one that people use. And it wasn't bad, but it certainly didn't balance out manganese and iodine. Colt Grower balances them all quite nicely. 1,000-pound horse, lactating mare. There's no higher requirement for minerals and nutrients than the lactating horse. 10 ounces of this Equipride supplement, which is not the recommended feeding rate, but that's what it took to even get close. And still phosphorus, really important. Iodine, vitamin E, still low. 3 ounces of DAC orange with our alfalfa and oats can balance this horse's diet. Now, most people aren't going to be feeding straight alfalfa. If you're feeding a grass blend, then you're going to have to bump up the oats or use a commercial concentrate to get more calories in the diet or add oil. But this can be done with good quality hay. I've also been asked a little bit about rice bran versus DAC bloom. Rice bran is about 20% fat. The bloom is about 35% fat. And the rice bran has no other real nutrients in it per se. When we think about biotin, bloom's got biotin, it's got zinc, methionine, lysine, crude protein, fat, all much higher in the DAC bloom as compared to the rice bran. So, little whirlwind tour through main minerals, uses in the horse, deficiencies, excesses. So I hope that you're a little better now able to answer people's questions when they say, well, My horse is eating plenty of hay and he looks nice and shiny. I don't know why I need to supplement him with anything. Oh, but maybe I am getting the farrier out a little more often than I should. Before we jump to a hoof supplement, maybe we just need to balance the diet to start with. So, any questions?